All right, it's Thursday. We're almost at the end of the week, and it's the Panther-Lair show. It's not the Panther-Lair show. It's the Morning Pitt here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That's how you can tell I don't do a lot of takes. I don't recut these things. If I say the wrong thing, I don't go back and re-record, because if I was, I mean, I'm only like 10 seconds into this video. I could just hit stop recording, start a new one, and call the show by its actual name, which is the Morning Pitt here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Of course, we had the Panther-Lair show last night with our guy Jim Hammett. Good to catch up with him. That was a lot of fun, as always. But this is the Morning Pitt, getting your day started right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You get your morning shave, you get your morning shower, and you get your morning pit. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We appreciate that as always. And head over and check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Message boards, always a lot of activity there, always a lot of conversations, and it's fun to delve into some of those topics. But I have something else I've been thinking about lately. Wrote an article yesterday, published an article yesterday about a quarterback that Pitt was after, a high school kid. He's a baseball player as well. He's committed to TCU to play baseball. And we were talking about his, we wrote about his interest and, his interactions with Frank Signetti and all those different, those normal sort of recruiting article things. And I started thinking about quarterbacks. And I started thinking about Pitt's quarterback situation, but quarterback recruiting overall. And it's certainly not a new topic that we haven't talked about before. We've discussed this a number of times. But it's still, I think it bears mentioning again and bringing up and sort of looking into a little bit further. And actually, on the back of some recent mail, I jotted down a whole lot of data and info here that I actually think is really interesting. It's more interesting than I expected it to be. I thought I might find a bit of a pattern, and I think I found even more of a pattern than I expected. Now, correlation does not always imply causation, and we're not going to, I'll probably repeat that a few times today. But there's some interesting things to look at. And the real simple question, and it's a clickbaity headline way to say it, but, no, actually, it's a stupid way to say it, but is high school quarterback recruiting dead? Well, no, it's not dead, obviously. You're still going to be recruiting high school quarterbacks. Everybody's going to recruit high school quarterbacks, and it's still going to be a priority, particularly for the biggest programs, to find good quarterbacks coming out of high school, to get the best guys and bring them in and build your program around them. It's not dead. It's not going to die. It's never going to. High school quarterback recruiting is never going to die, but the game has changed significantly. And I mean, Pitt is obviously an example. They were able to spend sort of 4 years outside the world of quarterback recruiting while they had Kenny Pickett leading the charge. But since then, they have dived headlong right back into it. I shouldn't even say that. Since they returned to the world of having to recruit quarterbacks on the reg and find new quarterbacks on the reg, they've pretty much lived entirely on the transfer portal, with Keaton Slovis starting all last year and now Phil Dracovic poised to start all this year. And if Dracovic doesn't work out, Christian Veilleux, another transfer, is going to be the guy to step in. And this is something we've talked about before. We've talked about how transfer portal, the abundance of quarterbacks in the transfer portal, how that position in particular, maybe more than any other, has been fundamentally changed. Or at least the approach to recruiting and roster building that position has been fundamentally changed due to the transfer portal. I've found, you see different sort of data research online where they run the numbers of just a high percentage of quarterbacks who transfer really early in their careers. Because that position, more than any other, probably because there's only going to be one on the field at any given time and you're not going to rotate like you would at running back, that position more than any other sees guys take off early, where they sit down, they take a realistic approach, a realistic look at their path to playing time, and if they don't see it, they go and they find somewhere else. And you don't have to look far to find it. Now, Pitt's last two quarterbacks have come in with a few years of experience as transfers, but Christian Veilleux is a great example. I mean, he should have been the next guy in line, or he expected to be the next guy in line, but then he realized he had been passed over, and so he was gone. He was two years at Penn State, and he was gone. And so he goes back on the market. He goes as a transfer who's got 3 years of eligibility. It's not a 1-year rental. And he's got 2 years of experience playing college football. And even if he was only on the field for 5 games and he didn't play that much, he's been through 2 years of the sport, of experiencing the sport and being around the sport. And the actual experience of being on the field is irreplaceable and invaluable, of course. But there's something to be said for living the college life and living the college football life and understanding what it takes, what the hours are like, what the commitment to film room is like, commitment to team meetings is like, commitment to practice time is like, commitment to strength work and weight room work and all those different things that you have to do that you probably don't fully grasp until you get to college. He's already been through it. He's been through it for 2 years. And he's adapted to it. And he's shown that he can adapt to it. He's got experience with it. So he's physically more mature. You would like to think he's emotionally, mentally more mature than a high school player who is going to be, no matter how good they look and their pedigree and all that, they're going to be a bit of a wild card because you never really know how they're going to adapt to being in college. I always say this, like, for you and I, going to college was this eye-opening, life-changing experience. And you probably like me, saw people who couldn't handle it, who couldn't adapt to life in college. And that was just like you and me in like Gen Pop general student population, seeing people who just couldn't handle the freedom, the responsibility, the lack of accountability other than to yourself, and couldn't really survive in that change of environment of going from living with your parents for 18 years to being on your own with various amounts of oversight depending on sort of your what walk of life you're in. And so we saw people who couldn't adapt, couldn't adjust to that. And I always bring this up when we talk about like recruiting rankings. We can measure 40s and height and weight, and we can see how high a guy can jump and whether he can run good pass patterns and whether he can catch the ball or throw the ball or tackle or block or whatever it is. But the one factor that we can never really account for in recruiting, and college coaches can't account for this, and they would probably tell you the same thing, that the one thing you can never really account for is how a guy is going to adapt to being on his own in college. And some of the best athletes, some of the most promising future NFL stars, the guys who you were sure were going to be an all-conference player or an All-American or a draft pick and all these things, boy, they had all the tools coming out of high school. This guy is going to be a stud, absolute sure thing, stone cold lead pipe block, and they don't pan out, they bust. Sometimes it's because they just couldn't handle that transition. This is a long way around of saying you get a little bit more of a sure thing when you take a transfer, particularly the quarterback position, a guy who's been in college for a couple of years, because that transition, which is one of the biggest, you've got your transition on the field, right? Where everybody's bigger and stronger and faster. And that's a big transition where the defenses are more complicated, the offenses are more complex, and all these things. I would say the transition off the field is just as big, if not more, and has just as much, if not more, to do with your success or failure as a college student athlete. And so when you take a guy like Christian Veilleux, you've got a guy who has already made that transition. You don't really have, if you've done your homework and you found out that he made the transition well and he adapted to the college life well, you don't have to worry about how he's going to do there. You can just focus on worrying about whether he's going to, how he's going to get your offense down and how good he is at recognizing defenses and his accuracy and his arm strength and all those other things. You can just worry about those, but you don't have to worry about how he's going to adapt to life as a college student. And so I think there's a big appeal there in looking for guys like him, young transfer quarterbacks. Along with that, it's squeezing the spots for the high school kids. It is. Because if you, and this was the idea with Joey Yellen, right? What year did Joey Yellen come in? 2020. Pitt didn't sign a quarterback recruit in 2020, right? Let me just make sure I'm not making that up, but I'm pretty sure that was the storyline at the time, because they brought in Joey Yellen in the class of 2020. Or they brought him in January of 2020. He joined the team that year, and Pitt did not sign a quarterback in 2020. So the way we kind of looked at it, Yellen was like a sophomore that year. I think he'd played 1 year at Arizona State. And I think we all looked at it like, okay, well, that just takes the place of their quarterback recruit for the 2020 class. And a lot of the things I'm saying now, I probably said at the time, of a guy who's already made the transition. You don't have to worry about how he's going to be as far as adjusting to life in college, because he's already gone through that. And so college coaches are looking at it, and I had college coaches and staffers say this to me back when Yellen was signed, and just at various points over the last few years of, look, we can scrape and dig and try and find those, gems, those, diamonds in the rough guys, the sleeper quarterbacks, just to take one. Or we can use that spot on a transfer quarterback who's got a year or two of college experience, might have even been on the field, might have played. A guy who can come in with roughly the same amount of eligibility, give or take a year, and fill that spot that way. And that's stuck with me. Because as I look at it, now Pitt, of course, I mean, they signed Nate Yarnell in the 2021 class. I have to bring this up here because I don't think they signed anyone in 22. They didn't. So no quarterback in the class of 2022. Ty Diefenbach this year. So you look over the past 4 recruiting classes, Pitt has signed 2 quarterbacks, right? As high school recruits. But they've also brought in 3 transfers. More, actually. I mean, if you count like Derek Kyler last year, Jeff George transferred in a few years ago. I mean, they've brought in more transfer quarterbacks than high school quarterbacks over the last 4 years. And it's probably not the worst approach. You'd like to bring in that guy that is just a stud in high school, and you can coach him up and develop him over 3 years, and then he starts for his final 2 after the previous starter leaves and all that. It doesn't work that way anymore. At least if it does, it doesn't happen very often. It feels like the more common trend, the more common approach is a guy comes in, and if he's not starting by year 2 or year 3, or he doesn't see a clear path to start by then, he's going to leave. And so you're left with a hole on your roster, and quite frankly, you're going out and looking for another guy like the one you just lost, someone who's been around for a year or 2, and you can bring in as a transfer. So I was thinking about this a lot this week because, Pitt, we're sort of tracking down the quarterback targets in the 2024 recruiting class. Frank Cignetti's been out on the road this month looking at quarterbacks. So it's not like Pitt is just ignoring high school quarterback recruiting after signing 2 transfers this offseason. They're still pursuing high school quarterbacks. But I started thinking about what they really need to do and whether, this whole idea I have that, the transfer quarterback movement is squeezing the numbers on high school kids. And so I looked back through, starting with the 2023 recruiting class this past year, all the way back to 2002, which is as far as the Rivals.com database goes. And I filtered it down to just current Power 5 schools, all right, and quarterbacks who signed with schools that are in the current Power 5. So, I mean, your 5 conferences plus Notre Dame. And what I found is that there were fewer quarterbacks signed by those schools in the class of 2023, the kids who are coming in as freshmen now, than in any of the previous 21 recruiting classes. Basically, the entire Rivals.com database, there's never been another class with fewer quarterbacks signed by the current Power 5 schools. 54 kids, 54 quarterbacks, pro-style and dual-threat quarterbacks signed with Power 5 schools in the recruiting class of 2023. Ty Diefenbach would be one of them. 54. There has never been another year since 2002, which is as far back as the recruiting database goes on Rivals.com. There has never been another year when fewer than 60 quarterbacks signed with those Power 5 schools. As a matter of fact, 15 of those previous 21 classes had 65 quarterbacks or more signed with Power 5 schools. 10 of those previous 21 classes had 70 quarterbacks signed with the current Power 5 schools, 70 plus. 4 of those classes had 75 quarterbacks signed with the current Power 5 schools. In the recruiting class of 2017, 81 quarterbacks signed with the schools that are currently in Power 5. 81. In 2016, 77 kids. Same thing in 2013. Same thing in 2004. This past year, 54. 27 fewer than signed in 2017. Over the course of 6 years, 27 fewer quarterbacks signed with Power 5 schools. Now, it's not, again, I'll come back to it. Correlation, not necessarily causation. I can't sit here and say, wow, it's entirely because of the transfer portal. But the numbers are fairly consistent up until about the last 4 years. Anywhere from generally about 65 to 75 in most years dating back to 2002. Again, some outlier years. 2008, only 60. That was the lowest outside of this past year. You know, and you get those high years, the 77 in 2004, 2013, 2016, and then, of course, 81 in 2017. But if you go forward from there, 2018, 72 quarterbacks signed with Power 5 schools. The next year, 64. So that's a drop, but it rebounded. 2020, the 2020 recruiting class, 72 quarterbacks signed with Power 5 schools. 2021, number drops from 72 to 69. 2022 drops from 69 to 63. 2023 drops from 63 to 54. There's not another 4-year stretch where the numbers dropped every year. You generally have ebbs and flows, and it's going to make sense, right? If a school, I mean, particularly when we're talking about, you know, Power 5, there's 65, 66 schools. So if you have 77 or 71 or 67 or however many quarterback signing, obviously some schools are signing more than one. And if you have that, you know, you're going to peak the numbers a little bit there when schools sign more than one, but then you're going to probably have a drop. So, you know, 77, they signed 77 in 2004. Okay, 77 quarterbacks signed with the current Power 5 schools in 2004. It dropped to 64 the next year. So it peaked and then dropped, but then went back up to 70 and back down to 64. You know, you get sort of waves. What you don't have is sort of a consistent dive like we've seen over the past 4 years. Another factor that has to be considered, and I'll say this, and probably the smarter people among us who are watching this are saying, well, you idiot, you're not thinking about this, is that over the past 4 years, you've had scholarship crunches overall due to the super senior rules. The NCAA said, hey, everybody who was on a roster in 2020 gets an extra year of eligibility, but we're not going to give you extra scholarship space to accommodate those guys. And so you've had, I think, probably on the whole, and this is anecdotal, smaller recruiting classes in general because schools have had fewer scholarships to work with under that 85 because they're not graduate, guys aren't rolling out as they should in kind of the year-to-year cycle. So that's part of it. That's part of it. And as those super seniors work their way out, and we're still probably another year or two away from that finally coming to fruition, we'll see if these quarterback numbers rebound. We'll see if recruiting numbers in general rebound. I'm of the mind that I think the super senior numbers keep going down, so those scholarship numbers keep going up, though. Okay, because Pitt kept lots of super seniors in 2021. A little bit less last year. A little bit less this year. And they'll have even fewer available and probably keep even fewer next year. Those numbers have been going down. So have the quarterback numbers. I'm more inclined to think that what we've seen over the past 4 years, 5 years, is the impact of transfers. And really in the last 3 and 4 years, we've seen the impact of the transfer portal. We've seen the impact of quarterbacks moving. And because of that, schools are recruiting fewer quarterbacks. This is my conclusion. And again, you can probably find a lot of other reasons why these numbers move the way they did. But my conclusion is that it's largely tied to portal movement, quarterback movement in the portal. If you look at this recruiting class of 2024, the guys who are going into their senior year of high school right now, or finishing up junior year of high school right now, the next recruiting class, the one that all the coaches are working on, I looked at the top 35 pro-style quarterback prospects in the class and the top 10 dual-threat quarterback prospects in the class. A combined total of 45 prospects. 34 of them have already committed. And there are a total of 40 quarterbacks in the class that are committed to Power 5 schools. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens between now on May 11th and signing day in December. Now, some of those guys who are committed are going to decommit. Some of the guys who, there's going to be different movement. But 40 quarterbacks committed to Power 5 schools right now. Let's see in December if we clear that number. Or we could go to February because a few more will sign in February. See if they clear that number of 54. You only need 15 more to have a little bit of a bounce back. Maybe 2023 was just the low point and the numbers will rebound a little bit. That'll be interesting to watch and it'll be telling. I'm inclined to think that it's probably not going to keep going down and down below 54 even. My guess is that it'll level out a little bit, but I don't think it'll rebound back to 72, 75, or some of those crazy numbers of 77 or 81. I think the quarterback recruiting game has changed. High school quarterback recruiting is not dead, but it is significantly different and not nearly as important as it once was. Is it outweighed by transfer portal recruiting? Is transfer portal quarterback recruiting more important than high school recruiting? I wouldn't make that blanket statement, but I would say it's getting probably close to equal time for coaches these days. And you can understand why. I think there's a lot of reasons, like we talked about at the top. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I'll put that data online. I put those numbers on the message board later today just to give you an idea. I know it's hard when I sit here and read numbers off a page, and I do that a lot. And I know it's hard to sort of process it. If I was smart, I would make some kind of graphic and put it on, somewhere over there so you could look at it on the screen while I was talking. Of course, that really means nothing to you if you listen to the audio podcast, but I'll put it on the message board as well so you can look at the numbers and kind of consider it and draw your own conclusions from what you think of that situation. But it's going to be one to watch over the next few years, and probably smarter people than me have dug into it even deeper than I just did. But I appreciate you going on that little journey down the data with me today. Like this video if you enjoyed some of those numbers, or at least kind of thinking about that topic, that concept, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then, of course, head over to the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate it. If you're a subscriber at Panther-Lair.com, on the message boards, we're taking questions for tomorrow's mailbag episode. So make sure you drop some in there, and we'll answer as many as we can tomorrow. Until then, have a great Thursday. Hope it's been a great week for you so far. I hope you have a great Thursday, and we will talk to you tomorrow morning on the Morning Pit right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.